It's Mailbag Monday. We answer your questions that you provided us today on the show, including what to do with Matt Murray, which core four member should get traded, is Sheldon Keefe safe, all that and more coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano from TSN, also my guy, Dave Morisuti from Sportsnet. Today's going to be a fun show. We haven't done a mailbag in a long time, Dave, so I'm excited to get into it. We put out a video, we put out a tweet asking all of our viewers. We tossed in the Discord. The Discord went off with questions for us, so that was awesome to see. But this is a segment that we'll probably do as the off-season nears. We'll do more often, maybe like twice a month. We could do a mailbag segment where you, the listeners, kind of control what we talk about by asking us the questions, and we will answer them to the best of our ability. That being said, why don't we get this show on the road, my guy? Because we got a lot of questions the good people have for us. So why don't we get things started? What do you want to hear first? What's the first question you wanna toss out here, Dave?
Well, I think we got to go with the one that you brought off kind of in your intro there, and it's about one Matt Murray. This coming from Albert B. What would it take for the Leafs to get rid of the Murray contract?
Oof. Okay, so this is an interesting one. It's a polarizing conversation, obviously, to talk about Matt Murray, because I think I'm of the belief that there's no way that Matt Murray is going to be on this Maple Leafs active roster next season. Does that mean that they roll the dice and maybe Matt Murray's injury history could end up, causing him to not play next season or at all, and he ends up on Robida Island? Perhaps. But if that's not the case, I think the Maple Leafs really have two options. One is trade Matt Murray. That would be option number one. And option number two, I guess, would be a buyout. What would it take for the Leafs to get rid of the Matt Murray contract? If we're talking trade, Dave, I think when you look at it, the reason why it makes it a little bit more difficult to trade Matt Murray is because his actual cash is worth more than the AAV. That's not typically the type of contracts that get traded. Typically, it's the opposite. It's the front-loaded deals that have large cap on the back end with not much money that teams like, Columbus or teams like Arizona and Chicago would like to take just to reach the cap floor. Florida did it for years, but this isn't that situation. This is a situation where it's a low cap number at about 4.75, but $6 million in actual cash, because Ottawa has 25% of his contract. He's actually making $8 million in real cash next year, which is just absurd for Matt Murray to be making $8 million. So what do you think it would take for the Leafs to be able to convince a team to take on that much of a detrimental contract? Basically, it's a $6 million contract, and you're essentially going to have to pay someone to take that on. In the past, we've seen this happen before, right? $6 million, that was the Patrick Marleau deal, and it cost at least a first-round pick. I would assume it would take a first-round pick for the Maple Leafs to find a taker for Murray's contract again. I don't think there would be so. There's no value to Matt Murray. If anyone thinks, seventh round pick and a bag of pucks, there's no value. You are going to have to pay to move Matt Murray. That's just a fact, unfortunately.
Yeah, the unfortunate part here is the injuries, right? Because performance-wise, I've seen worse from Leafs goaltenders. We're not talking about Peter Mrazek performance-wise. It's the injuries that's the problem with Matt Murray. So a team that's trained for him They're going into the idea that he's not going to play a lot of games for us, so we're not going to give up any assets. First off, the Leafs didn't even give up any assets for
No.
to begin with. Like if you think the Leafs in some way are going to try to make a hockey trade out of this, where they're going to try to get something back, that's just not going to happen. I also think when you look at the fact that Matt Murray has a modified no trade clause,
There's another problem.
He could put a lot of teams on that list that are going to give the Leafs a lot of problems trying to move him. And Murray's earned that right because he got that negotiated into his contract. So there's a lot of issues in trying to make this deal for the Leafs. And that's why it's going to cost a pretty penny if a team says, yeah, we'll take Matt Murray and we're not on his trade list. It is going to cost that first round pick. And it's not going to be one of those, we're going to trade, you give us a first round pick and we'll give you a second round pick back. This is not going to be like the Peter Mrazek situation.
No, it's not. It's not going to be that at all. This is a much different situation. It's much closer to the Patrick Marleau deal in the Maple Leafs had to pay first round pick for a team who basically they bought a first round pick for $6 million. I think it would be relatively the exact same situation. The question is then, well, do you want to give up would the Maple Leafs want to give up a first round pick to get out of the contract, or is there another situation or another way to get out of Matt Murray's contract? And there is, and it's a conversation that you could have, and I'm sure they're going to deliberate this in the front office. Are you better off buying out Matt Murray? So keeping that first round pick and buying him out. But what that would mean for the team is you would have a dead cap hit next season as well. So you could trade him away this year, give up the first round pick, and you would have none of his cap remaining on the books. You would completely try and move out that money and open up the $4.7 million that's on the cap next season. Or you could buy him out and you would end up saving a lot of money next year. You could save, what would you be saving over cap? So his cap hit next year would be $687,000. So you'd be saving like $3.9 million in cap if you bought him out this year, but then there'd be a $2 million cap hit the following season. And that's where you got to, think to yourself, what would we rather? Would we rather give up a first round pick and just not have to worry about that cap hit? Or would you rather keep the first round pick, but take that $2 million cap hit in year number 2 of that buyout? That ultimately, I think, is the question that Brad Treliving and company are going to have to ask themselves moving forward. Because that, to me, is whichever you would rather do is essentially how you would go about the Matt Murray situation this offseason.
Yeah, and that's why, the idea of trading a first round pick, it just doesn't sit well. Now, look, it's a late first round pick, so you're not trading like what they did with Carolina, where you're trading a top 15 pick, and then it ended up being a decent player in Seth Jarvis going the other way. At the same time, the $2 million is a tough one for the Leafs, where they've been penny pitching pretty much every season. Like $2 million does mean a lot. But $2 million can also be made up in different ways. We've seen the way that caps, like, look at Vegas's cap right now. Like, teams find a way that even if you're spending a little bit more, you find ways to save, right? It's the cost of doing business. I think the first round pick might be actually worth more than having than the situation where you're saying, do we want that $2 million cap hit? I think the first round pick is more worth keeping than trying to do that.
I agree. So I think that a buyout is more likely than a trade of Matt Murray. I'm fully with you. All right, let's get another one here. We thank you for the question, Albert B. That was a good one, and one that I know has been a topic of conversation for a little bit here. Why don't we hear from somebody else now and get another question from one of the listeners? Just a reminder, you can use, we'll be doing these mailbags throughout the off season a lot more often. So make sure that when you see us reach out to asking for questions and you want to know, what we think on something, just make sure that you reach out and also write in a question either on Twitter, on the Discord, or up the YouTube video that we're posting. Are you putting another one up here?
Yep, I got one here from Ryan J.
Beauty.
asking about Max Domi. Is Max Domi a good fit for the team? If so, who do we give up to make it happen?
I'm pretty sure it's a UFA. Is
Yeah,
it
that
not?
was going to be my first answer. Well, the Leafs don't have to give up anything other than, making room for him on the roster.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I know Max Domi's a player that obviously, people in this market love because of who his father was. But I'm not so sure that he necessarily fits this team all too well. And I think it would depend on what he wants. If he just wants to rehabilitate his career, perhaps. And keep in mind, he's coming off a pretty good season that he had this year with Chicago, getting dealt to Dallas. Made it to the conference final. Like, Max Domi had a decent year where he somewhat rehabilitated his image and resurrected his career. That being said, he probably will be looking for a couple $1 million this summer. And
And he
I
just
don't
came off a
know.
deal that paid him $3 million.
Yeah, and he probably would want something similar. 3 to 4 million, I think, would be in the range that he's looking to get. And I don't think the Maple Leafs are really in the market for a player like him who's making that much money. Like I don't know if that makes a lot of sense for Toronto, to be completely honest with you. It's a fun name, obviously, with the lineage with his father, but ultimately, unless he's willing to take a discount of like under 2 million, like 1.5, I'm not sure I got much love for Max Domi in a Leafs uniform next season.
He didn't have, like, when Dallas traded for him, he wasn't very good for them in the regular season. It wasn't until the playoffs that he did get better. Yeah, there's some good attributes that he brings. He's a decent skater. He brings that edge. I think that a lot of people like, but he's also a very inconsistent player. He went from being a 72-point player to then barely even being, a top 6 guy. It's like you don't know what you're gonna get with Max Domi, and that just doesn't seem like a wise investment when he's not going to take a discount to come to Toronto, right? He's going to look to get a little bit more stability if a team is willing to offer a multi-year deal. And if I'm Toronto, I'm not giving Max Domi a multi-year deal. So yeah, I don't think the fit is there for many reasons. He's not, he'd be a nice addition, but not for what the Leafs need to look at doing this offseason. He wouldn't be a priority for me.
The money would have to be right. The money would have to definitely be right for Max Domi. I mean, there's space for guys, I guess. Like the Leafs only have, I think, 7 forwards currently under contract right now with the team. So there is space for a Max Domi and some depth players, but at the right number, right? And it remains to be seen if Max Domi is willing to take a pay cut to come home to Toronto, or would he prefer to, continue to make some money and go elsewhere where there's maybe more top 6 opportunity, and go back to Chicago, perhaps a chance to play with Connor Bedard. I mean, guy had 49 points in 60 games when he was with Chicago, and to your point, just 7 in 20 games after the trade. But if he could go back there, hey, maybe something like that could work. But I'm not just 100% sold that it would work here in Toronto. All right. He does have a good motor, though. I'll say that. And speaking of motors, today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. A championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. So for parts that fit, head to eBay Motors and look for the green check. Stay in the game with eBay Guaranteed Fit. ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. I'm Mike DiStefano. I got my main man, Dave Morisuti, with me. We're doing a mailbag here today. So you guys are in charge of the content that we'll be talking about, not only today, but also tomorrow. It's a 2-part podcast, so make sure that you return tomorrow. If your question wasn't answered on today's show, it should be answered on tomorrow's show. We got a lot of questions, especially from our friends over in the Discord group. They went ham in the Discord asking some questions. So why don't we get to a couple of those ones as well, Dave? Toss up the next question here that we want to answer on our mailbag segment. What do we got?
We'll go to the Discord. Canadian Ranger, one of our top, I would say, contributors to the Discord.
Yeah, absolutely. Shout out Canadian Ranger.
All right. What role do you see Shane Doan playing in Toronto's front office? So this is a bit of a speculative one here. We're going to either have to look
explain this report to me because this kind of randomly popped up today. Can you explain it to me? Do you have any more information here?
Yeah, so it just kind of was just floated out there. Nick Kyprios did say that there were some rumblings that the Leafs were interested in bringing Shane Doan into the front office. Elliot Friedman said it can't be confirmed, but that it wasn't totally off in that idea either. So there's a history here between Brad Treliving and Shane Doan for the time in Arizona, right?
Yes, Brad Treliving was the assistant general manager for many seasons. While Shane Doan was the captain for the Coyotes. So clearly, they do have a working relationship together. So that would make sense. So what? Shane Doan's going to leave Arizona and come to Toronto?
Well, he's not even with the Coyotes anymore, right?
Really?
Yeah, he left. When did he leave? I think it was like last September. He left the organization. He was taking a step back.
Didn't they draft his son?
Yeah, he did draft his son. He actually was the one that made the pick, I'm pretty sure. So I don't know where exactly what his role would be. I guess it would probably be in some sort of like Jason Spezza like role where he's kind of an assistant to the general manager in some regard.
Well, here's the thing with Shane Doan. I'm going to double check this, but Shane Doan, if I'm not mistaken, he does have more, like he has actual managerial experience. I'm pretty sure, was he not the GM of the World Junior Championships this past year? Like I thought that he had some managerial experience. I'm trying to find it here to see what exactly
he was a part of the World Hockey Championship leadership team with Doug Armstrong and Stevie Yzerman.
Yeah, sorry, World Hockey Champ, not Junior. Yeah. World Hockey Championships. So like he does have some, managerial experience, unlike Spezza. So I mean, AGM probably wouldn't even be out of the question. Probably not. Obviously, he's not going to be a general manager. That's not Brad Treliving's job. But potentially, could he come in and be like another one of the Maple Leafs 80,000 AGMs? Probably. And just be considered one of the right-hand men to Brad Treliving? That could make some sense. For sure, I could see him playing that type of role if he wants to come here. That'll be an interesting thing to follow because I think he's a very smart hockey person and, he's a power forward. So if that's the case, I mean, maybe that does kind of change the complexion of how this team wants to operate if they start bringing in guys who, played a certain way and have certain beliefs in a style of play. So I think Shane Doan would be a welcomed addition within the Maple Leafs front office. We'll see where that goes. All right, next one.
All right, we're going to go back to the YouTube ones. This is from Patrick G. Mafia. What do you guys think is a fair deal for Nylander? I personally think we should get a defenseman and some picks or possibly a trade for that second pick from Anaheim. Let's just say I don't think Anaheim is trading Adam Fantilli for William Nylander.
No, I don't think so either.
He's a franchise center. He would be the number one overall pick if it wasn't for Connor Bedard.
Yeah, 100%. I also got a tweet today. Somebody sending me their a trade proposal, and it was William Nylander for Thatcher Demko, JT Miller with $3 million retained, and Anthony Beauvillier for only William Nylander. That's what somebody reached out to me and was like, hey, Toronto should do this. Yeah, I bet they would if that was a possibility. But guess what? That sure as hell ain't a possibility. What do I think is a fair deal for William Nylander? Look, I actually agree with Patrick here where I think that Toronto, if you are going to deal one of the big four, I am on board with trying to get a defenseman in return. That's kind of been my thought process here for the last week or so. And when you look back at Brad Treliving and what he's done with his blue lines throughout the course of his tenure as general manager in Calgary, he had a pretty beefy blue line. Like there's some size there to the guys out in Calgary right now. And, you look at Toronto, little undersized for what you would expect a Brad Treliving blue line to look like. So I would anticipate that if there is going to be some sort of deal here for the core four, let's say it is William Nylander, I think that he's looking around the league and thinking to himself, okay, who's a big defenseman who could skate, who's under contract, and look for that hockey deal, similar to the Ryan Johansson-Seth Jones trade. It's a little different because these guys are a little further along than Johansson and Jones. Well, Nylander's, I guess, a little further along. But I think that would be in the ilk of those types of deals. A hockey trade where, a team maybe has a surplus in blue liners. For a team in Toronto, clearly has a surplus in top end forwards, and you help each other out. You get a nice little swap. Off the top of my head, I can't. Can you think of a trade that might work here potentially, or a team that might have some interest or some blue liners? Like, I mean, potentially you could take a peek, maybe at like Winnipeg. The problem is, like, Nylander does have a no trade that also does kick in pretty soon. You could potentially look at the Islanders, like, is Ryan Pollock a potential option? Maybe you could try and bring a guy like that into the fold. I think that would be maybe an interesting maneuver. Does Colorado want another, forward? Could they give up maybe a Devon Taves? I don't know if they would be interested in doing that, but.
So you brought up that name, and I wanted to stop here because I actually listened to the boys over at Locked On Avalanche.
Yeah.
And there's rumbling, like there's worries there that, they have so much invested there that Devon Taves, he's going to be a UFA after the next season, just like Nylander, and they're not going to be able to afford him. And with Gabriel Landeskog out for the season, they need to add scoring up front, and that's why they said, it wouldn't be a bad idea to see if a Devon Taves for William Nylander trade could be a possibility.
There we go. Do we possibly have a fair deal? I think that's a good starting point. Devon Taves, William Nylander, he kind of sorted out from there, but I do think that is a good, starting point for a package that could help both sides, both squads. Yeah. All right. We got another one here that we want to get to before taking a break. Actually, let's take a break first. Let's take one more break. When we get back, we'll get into a couple more questions. And remember, this is part 1 of 2 that we're going to be doing here for Locked On Leafs. Return for tomorrow's episode if your question did not get answered. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morisuti. The Locked On Leafs podcast will continue after a word from our show sponsors. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. We're doing a mailbag edition of the show today where you, the listeners, the viewers, take over what we are going to talk about. We've gone over a few of these already, whether it's, those who got involved asking questions on YouTube. And we've also had a Twitter question and also a bunch of you guys from the Discord. We thank everybody who asked questions. We want to try and get to all of them. Why don't we continue along and get to another one here? So just toss up any one of these that we got cooking, Dave, and let's answer it. Oh, this is an interesting one, mainly just because of the name. Yeah. Donald J. Trump 69. Nice. Do you think they're committing one way or another on Keefe to see if Coach Q gets reinstated? Dave, you go first on this one.
I mean, I've talked about Joe Quenneville a few times on the pod. I personally don't, and Mike brought up some good reasons why he doesn't think Quenneville to the Leafs makes sense, mainly because of the issues that he is currently dealing with and not working in the NHL for. Like, if
no, not mainly. It's the only reason.
Sorry, the only reason, right? Like, he would be with the Florida Panthers right now. Maybe they'd be doing a better job in the Stanley Cup final. Just saying. But I think what they're trying to do with Sheldon Keefe is they don't want to use that bullet in their chamber just yet, right? There's Brad Treliving has no reason to get rid of Sheldon Keefe right now. Yeah, maybe if Joe Quenneville gets reinstated, they can have that conversation. But I, I just don't think right now is the time where you get rid of Sheldon Keefe because you don't need to. Like, there's really no reason to do it unless there's another coach other than Joe Quenneville that you really want, and you're just like, you know what, we would like to have Sheldon Keefe return, but we think this guy's better. Let's just go and get him. But I just, for Joe Quenneville, I don't think the Leafs are making that move right now.
So I had a few people in the last video when I brought up the report that it's possible that instead of seeing Sheldon Keefe get fired, in fact, we could actually see him get a contract extension. And I was told that I was losing my marbles a little bit. I'm curious to what you think, Dave. Do you think it's more likely that Sheldon Keefe gets let go this summer or gets an extension?
I think it's more likely at this point, hearing how Brad Treliving was talking about him, I think it's more likely he gets an extension.
Okay, do you think it's more likely he gets an extension or plays out the season as a lame duck coach?
I don't think they're going to do the lame duck coach approach. You don't see teams do that. Like, you don't see many teams go into that final year with their coach just because you're setting yourself up for that constant question, like what they did with Kyle Dubas, right? Coach is a little different because he's the one facing the media every day. So he can't duck those questions like Kyle Dubas when he just did his, random appearances throughout the season, right? You give them the extension. That's one thing the coach doesn't have to talk about or think about. Sure, is his job security still like fully intact? No. And we kind of know this with Sheldon Keefe, and he knows it. But at least with the extension, that brushes away some of that idea of him always having to talk about, are you coaching for your job? What are you going to do? Do you think you're going to come back next year? He can at least say, well, I have a contract, so I'll be back. And that ends that conversation right there.
Yeah. Yep. We'll see what happens, obviously, with that one. I'm going to toss one up on the screen here because this is one that I think we should get to, and it might be a bit of a spicy meatball. So why don't we get to it right now? Blue 13, another beauty from the Discord. If Matthews is to be extended, will the extension also come along with the C?
That is spicy. I saw that one. I'm just like, yeah, we're gonna have to talk about this one for sure. And you gotta sell Austin Matthews in a lot of ways. Now, money speaks a lot, but also maybe just having a different. I don't think there's a problem if the Leafs decide they need a different voice in that locker room. Like, John Tavares has guided this team. He's done an okay job. I don't think he's been the best captain in terms of. I don't think he was the best choice when you think of guys in the locker room and you're building around Austin Matthews. That's where I think the captain conversation makes more sense. I personally think Morgan Rielly should have been the captain if you're looking for the best guy in the room, because I think Morgan Rielly has proven that he can be that guy. But we know that the Leafs want to make sure that Austin Matthews is priority number one. And what better way to say you're priority number one, but also say this is going to be your team. Now, is he ready to be the captain? Well, he wasn't ready when John Tavares was named the captain because we know what happened not too long after that announcement was made.
Before the announcement was made, actually, which some people, some little tin hat theorists think that that's the reason why Tavares got it over Matthews also.
Yeah. I just think that, if you're going to eventually move off from JT with that captaincy, you have that conversation and say, you know what, we appreciated what you've done here. You'll still be a very important part of this team, but we also want to usher in, Austin as the guy, right? The kind of take that responsibility a little bit more.
I'll tell you the only way I'm on board with it. Okay, the only way I see Austin Matthews getting the C. The first is he commits to a long-term deal.
Yes.
I don't want to see 3, 4, 5 years and also get the captaincy. I think it's got to be in the 6, 7, 8 range.
Mm-hmm.
If he's going to get a captaincy along with this contract, because that shows that he's got the buy-in for this group, and he should be the captain if that's the case, because he's the face of the franchise anyways. The other thing is, if he's signing for 8 years, let's also not sign for 15 mil a season. Like, let's also maybe keep you could take a little bit of a discount, right? Getting a captaincy, that's got to be worth something too. You know what I mean? So I think it depends on the extension and what the parameters in terms of it are. So if it's like, I don't know, 5 years and he's like, I want 14.5, no, I don't think you really deserve the captaincy. But if he takes an 8-year deal at like 13 million or 13.5, yeah, I think that would deserve a conversation. And here's why I think that it's also more likely to happen this year than it would have happened in years past when it's been discussed if the captaincy should change hands, similar to the way that you saw happen in San Jose many years ago. It's a new general manager, and this guy did not give the captaincy to John Tavares. He doesn't have that technical allegiance. I'm sure he respects John Tavares and respects the fact that Kyle gave him the captaincy. But now you're looking and it's like, okay, Sheldon Keefe never gave him the C, and now neither did the GM, right? Both Babcock and Kyle Dubas were the guys who decided to give John Tavares the captaincy, and neither with this organization anymore. So that's not to say that that the new guys, Keefe and Treliving, and Keefe not really a new guy, but you know what I mean, won't respect that decision and keep things status quo. I'm just saying maybe there's a chance that a conversation could be had and this topic could be broached amongst the leadership group if Matthews were to extend on a long-term team-friendly deal.
Yeah, and you're not just giving Austin Matthews the captaincy just for the sake of giving him the captaincy. There has to be a commitment from both sides onto doing this, and doing it for the right reasons too.
All right, I've got one really quickly that I want to put up here because I thought that it was a hilarious question.
Sure.
Greg H. This isn't Leafs related, but it kind of is. How fast does Gaudreau and Laine ask for a trade out of Columbus with Babcock getting hired there? So if you missed the news, Mike Babcock is reportedly going to sign in Columbus to be their next head coach once his deal expires with Toronto, which I believe is supposed to expire June 30th or after June 30th. So on July 1, he will be eligible to he'll be a free agent coach, and he'll be able to sign in Columbus. And that's the full expectation. To answer the question, how fast do I expect for them to get a trade out of Columbus? Laine, it probably happened yesterday when that report happened. Laine's like, screw this. I'm not doing this again. I did it with Torts. I hated it. I outlasted him. I don't want to go through it again with Babs. I think Laine is sitting there just hating himself right now. I don't actually think Gaudreau is as big of an issue as some are making it seem. Like, I've seen online, everyone saying like, oh, what about Johnny Gaudreau is going to like that? Johnny Gaudreau had his career year under Daryl Sutter, who's also a very hard-nosed coach, right?
Yeah.
So, I'm not so sure that Gaudreau wouldn't like Babcock. So maybe he would stick it out a little bit and see what it's all about. Laine, I think he knows exactly what Babs is all about, and he wants no part in it. No part of it. That's a name that I expect to be floated around at the draft and, this summer as potential trade fodder. And, hey, I mean, does he still have something in him? Maybe, but I don't think he wants to play for Mike Babcock.
No, and I'll say this about Laine. Like, I think Columbus should be looking to trade him regardless. I just don't know. Like, that trade just has not really worked out for them, in my opinion.
No, it has not.
And yeah, I think with Gaudreau, like, you don't think Columbus kind of floated that idea to Gaudreau and be like, we're gonna bring this guy, and you okay with that? Like, they made a very sizable commitment to Johnny Gaudreau. They're not just gonna bring in a coach that he's gonna hate, right? So that's the other thing to keep in mind as well.
I just like since coming to Columbus, it's just crazy how, you know, poor he's actually been. Like it's
Yeah.
the goal scoring is just not really he hasn't been healthy either. Like last year, only 55 games and only 56 games the year before that. So like the guy just hasn't even been healthy enough to really get going. Like anytime he starts to pick up some steam, like there was a time, I think it was like back in November, December, where he did have like a 14, 15 game stretch where it's like, oh, okay, Line's starting to do some things, and then he would get hurt, and he was out for 6 weeks, and it's like, okay, well, guess not, guess he's not back. But like, man, the guy has immense talent when he's on his A game. Um, there should be a lot of interest in him. I bet you a lot of teams would have interest in Patrick Laine if he is available via trade, and probably at a discount based on how he's played, performed, and also the contract situation. All right, why don't we stop here and continue the rest of the mailbag questions? We'll leave a couple for tomorrow. We'll finish things up and go through the rest of them. So if you didn't hear your question asked, we will get to it on tomorrow's show, guaranteed. We will. So be patient with us because there were a lot of different questions that were tossed out into the universe asking us for answers. So yes, return tomorrow for more answers to those. That'll do it for us here today on the podcast, though. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all podcasts and platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morris Sudi, and follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. Go ahead, leave a like and a comment on YouTube as well. That'd be greatly appreciated. Let us know your thoughts and answers to the questions we asked down below. We'll be back another episode tomorrow. It's part 2 of the mailbag coming at you. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.